On August 10th, 2020, a line of thunderstorms rolled out of South Dakota at breakfast time, and by lunch it had turned into the most expensive non-tornadic storm event in the history of the United States. $11.5 billion in a single day, 140-mile-per-hour winds at ground level. That is a Category 4 hurricane, except it arrived with 15 minutes of warning on a clear summer morning 900 miles from the nearest coastline. Cedar Rapids, Iowa lost 70% of its tree canopy. Over 1 million homes and businesses lost power. Some of them stayed dark for weeks. And 850,000 acres of crops were a complete loss. USDA figures later showed the storm compounded an active drought already affecting 31 Iowa counties. Here's the part that should be sitting with you right now. The August 2020 derecho happened during Atlantic hurricane season. Everyone was watching the tropics. Nobody was watching the plains. The Storm Prediction Center started the day with a marginal risk, their lowest category, and within a few hours was upgrading through the morning as the storm became impossible to ignore. By then, Iowa was already being erased. I am telling you this today because right now, as every weather conversation in this country is focused on the Gulf after Tropical Storm Arthur, there is an atmospheric pattern loading over the Central Plains that looks uncomfortably similar to what preceded August 2020. And I do not think enough people are paying attention to it. Let me break down exactly what is building, why it is more dangerous than it looks on paper, and what it means for the next 10 days. Before we go any further, I need to spend a few minutes on this because I genuinely believe the derecho knowledge gap is one of the most dangerous public weather literacy problems in the United States. Ask someone on the street what a tornado is, and they will describe it accurately. Ask them what a hurricane is. Same thing. These are weather events that have been covered so extensively for so long, with such memorable historical anchors, that the public has a real mental model of what they look like and what they mean. Now ask someone what a derecho is. Most people cannot tell you. And that gap in knowledge directly affects survival behavior, because the warning system for a derecho is a severe thunderstorm warning, not a tornado warning. And most people treat those very differently. Here is what a derecho actually is. The word comes from Spanish, meaning straight or direct, as opposed to the spiraling motion of a tornado. A derecho is a widespread, long-lived windstorm produced by a fast-moving band of severe thunderstorms. For a storm complex to officially qualify as a derecho, it has to produce wind gusts of at least 58 miles per hour across a damage path of at least 250 miles, with embedded gusts of 75 miles per hour or higher. Those are the minimums. A major derecho blows those thresholds out of the water. The mechanics behind why derechos produce the kind of winds they do are worth understanding. A normal thunderstorm produces a downdraft, cold, dense air sinking from altitude and spreading outward when it hits the ground. That outflow is what you feel as a sudden cool gust when a storm approaches. In a derecho, that downdraft process gets weaponized into something called a rear inflow jet. Here is how it works. As the thunderstorm complex moves forward rapidly, the system creates a pressure gradient that actually pulls air in from behind and above, funneling it downward and forward, right into the leading edge of the storm. That descending jet of air exits the storm's base at the front and slams into the surface. It adds its velocity directly on top of whatever the surface winds are already doing. In a major event, that rear inflow jet can arrive at the surface with no prior warning to a home weather station or a surface anemometer, because it originated several thousand feet up and only touches down in the final moments. You do not see it coming on a wind graph until it is already destroying your roof. The storm also develops what's called a bow echo, which is exactly what it sounds like on radar. The squall line bows outward at the point of maximum wind because the cold pool is pushing forward fastest in the center. And at the northern curl of that bow, a bookend vortex forms. That embedded rotation is where the most extreme winds concentrate, and where the storm starts producing brief, violent tornadoes embedded within the straight-line wind machine. In 2020, the bow echo over Iowa produced a bookend vortex so intense that a post-storm survey found winds consistent with 140 miles per hour at ground level. That is not a wind speed that gets mentioned on a severe thunderstorm warning. It sounds more like something from a major hurricane discussion. And yet it came in under a severe thunderstorm warning, not a tornado warning. Most people heard severe thunderstorm warning and stayed on the couch. This is the piece of the current setup that I cannot stress enough, and it ties directly to everything we have been talking about on this channel over the past week regarding the drought situation across the country. Right now, somewhere between 60 and 75% of the continental United States is under drought conditions of some severity. The Plains states, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, Iowa, Illinois, are in the zone where the drought has been running long enough that the deep layer soil moisture is genuinely depleted. Not just surface dryness that a couple of good rain events can fix. Deep deficit that has been building for months. Here's what that does to the atmospheric energy equation. On a normal summer day over moist soil, a significant fraction of the sun's energy goes into evaporating water from the ground and from vegetation. That process, evapotranspiration, pulls energy out of the sensible heat budget, the part that goes directly into warming the air. Moist soil is cooler soil, but when the soil is bone dry, that energy has nowhere to go except into heating the surface itself and the air above it. The surface temperature skyrockets. The air just above the ground superheats. Now put that together with an air mass aloft that is still relatively cool, the way any mid-level air mass is in late June before the full heat of summer has worked its way up through the atmosphere. You now have an enormous temperature difference between the baking surface and the air a few thousand feet up. That temperature contrast is what atmospheric scientists measure as CAPE, convective available potential energy. Think of CAPE as the amount of fuel stored in the atmosphere that a thunderstorm can tap once something triggers it to start rising. In a drought year, CAPE values over the baked plains can reach levels normally associated with the most volatile severe weather environments on the continent. 2,000, 2,500, sometimes 3,000 joules per kilogram of energy sitting in the atmospheric column, waiting. The 2020 Iowa derecho formed in an environment with CAPE values between 2,000 and 2,500 joules per kilogram over drought-stressed Iowa farmland. That number is sitting in my head right now as I look at the forecast for the next several days. Let me get specific about the pattern, because this is a weather channel and specifics are what matter. The mechanism driving the elevated severe weather risk for the latter part of this week and into early next week is an amplifying trough in the northwest. A trough is a dip in the jet stream, a bend in the upper level flow that drags colder air southward on its western side and pumps warmer air northward on its eastern side. When a trough amplifies, when that dip deepens, it accelerates the jet stream on both flanks and it creates what meteorologists call a jet streak, a concentrated river of fast-moving upper-level wind that acts as an engine for storm development underneath it. As that jet streak sweeps eastward across the plains and into the Midwest over the next several days, it will be overriding an atmosphere that is carrying extraordinary instability from drought-amplified surface heating. The combination of strong upper-level forcing, a jet streak pumping speed into the mid-levels, and deep surface instability is the exact recipe that produces organized, fast-moving, long-lived thunderstorm complexes, the kind that can grow into derechos if the wind field aligns correctly. The Storm Prediction Center is already signaling multiple days of severe weather potential through this period, with particular emphasis on the High Plains and Northern Plains corridor. Wednesday is flagged for scattered severe storms across the central High Plains, with large to very large hail. That is the warm-up act. The main event window, as the trough reaches peak amplitude and the jet streak overspreads the northern tier of the plains, sits from Thursday through the weekend. The SPC's own language describes this window as multiple days with eventual severe weather probabilities, which is forecaster speak for. We do not have the precision yet to pin down which day is the worst day, but we are confident that multiple bad days are coming in this corridor. I want to be precise about what I am and am not saying here. I'm not telling you that a repeat of 2020 is guaranteed. I'm telling you that the ingredients for a 2020 class event are stacking up, and that in an environment where the drought has preloaded the atmospheric fuel tank and the jet stream pattern is providing the ignition, a severe weather outbreak that turns into a derecho complex is not just possible this week. It is the kind of outcome the pattern is clearly capable of producing. Whether it verifies at that level depends on details in the mid-level wind field and the convective initiation timing that will sharpen up in the short-range models over the next 24 to 48 hours. Here's the part of this that I think about at night, and I want to be honest that this is me connecting dots that are individually well documented, but whose combination does not get discussed often enough. Right now, across the central and eastern United States, the power grid is under stress. Last week's heat pushed demand to near record levels across multiple grid regions. Utilities were running close to capacity. Cooling equipment in data centers, hospitals, and apartment buildings ran around the clock. The grid managed it, but it was not comfortable. Next week, forecasters are signaling a heat dome building over the Great Lakes in the mid-Atlantic and Northeast. We are talking about potentially extreme heat. Temperatures well above normal across a densely populated corridor that includes some of the oldest transmission infrastructure in the country. Upward of 100 million people were already at or above 90 degrees Fahrenheit last week. That number will likely grow. Now, put a major derecho into that sequence. A fast-moving bow echo complex racing across the plains and Midwest in the Thursday through Saturday window, knocking out transmission towers, downing distribution lines, taking substations offline across a path of 90,000 square miles of terrain. Just like 2020, which left parts of Iowa without power for 10 days. And then, as the power grid is already damaged and utility crews are trying to restore service in the days after the derecho, the heat dome arrives. No air conditioning in a heat wave is not a weather inconvenience, it is a medical emergency. The people most vulnerable, elderly residents, people with cardiovascular or respiratory conditions, anyone in a poorly insulated home, cannot survive multi-day summer heat without cooling. The 1995 Chicago heat wave, which was not preceded by any major storm damage, killed over 700 people in 5 days, the majority of them elderly. The majority of those elderly people were found in apartments without air conditioning with the windows closed because they were afraid to open them at night. That was with the power grid fully intact. Remove the power grid from that scenario, remove the air conditioning, and you have turned a bad weather week into a public health catastrophe. I'm not predicting that this sequence will fully materialize. I'm telling you that each individual component of this scenario, the derecho potential this week, the heat dome building next week, the grid stress that already existed before either of those, is documented, forecast, and real. And the combination has not gotten the attention it deserves because everyone is still thinking about Arthur and the tropics. Let me map this out as concretely as I can, given what the models show today. Today, Tuesday the 23rd, a synoptic front is lifting northward from the Gulf Coast to the eastern Carolinas, and scattered severe storms are possible ahead of it through the afternoon and evening. The primary hazard is gusty winds and heavy rain. Not a major outbreak, but enough to catch people off guard along the I-95 corridor from Georgia into the Carolinas. If you are in that zone today, keep an eye on the radar through the afternoon. Wednesday the 24th. The main story shifts to the central high plains. A passing mid-level jet streak and shortwave trough will combine with extreme surface instability to produce scattered severe thunderstorms from northern Colorado into eastern Wyoming and southwestern South Dakota. The primary threat on Wednesday is large to very large hail. And I mean baseball-sized or larger in the most intense cells. This is the most photogenic part of the pattern, the kind of thing that gets storm chasers excited, and it will get attention. But it is not the most dangerous part of what is building. Thursday the 25th into Friday the 26th. This is the window I'm watching most carefully. The amplifying trough reaches its deepest configuration, and the jet streak it produces sweeps eastward over the northern plains, overriding what will be an absolutely primed instability environment over the drought-stressed wheat and corn belt. This is the window where the atmospheric setup most closely resembles the conditions that have historically produced major long-track derecho events. Watch for the SPC to issue mesoscale discussions and potentially convective watches for a corridor from the northern plains into the upper Midwest during this period. The specific storm mode, whether individual supercells, a squall line, or a derecho complex, will depend on details that clarify in the 24 hours before the event. But the energy available is not small. Saturday the 27th. Any organized storm complex that formed Friday evening over the high plains has the potential to still be moving through the central Midwest on Saturday morning in the way that the 2020 derecho formed in South Dakota and crossed Iowa before noon. The energy is still available, and the jet streak is still present. This is not the time to assume the worst of the pattern has passed just because it was active the night before. The week of June 30th. The focus shifts northeastward as the trough lifts out, but the instability does not disappear. It rides east with the moisture, and the heat dome that is expected to build over the Great Lakes and Mid-Atlantic will actually create new severe weather potential at the edges of the heat, where the temperature contrast between the hot dome and the surrounding air produces its own boundary layer dynamics. Meanwhile, the grid stress from the heat itself will be the primary story, and if any significant infrastructure damage happened in the derecho corridor to the west, that stress will compound. The action close for this video is different from what I usually give you, and I want to be direct about why. The most important thing you can do before this week's severe weather window is to update your mental model of what a severe thunderstorm warning means. This is going to sound redundant if you follow weather closely, but the data on public behavior during warning events is clear. People consistently treat tornado warnings as life-threatening and severe thunderstorm warnings as mild inconvenience. The 2020 Iowa derecho generated 140 mile-per-hour winds under a severe thunderstorm warning. If you are in a mobile home, a car, a camper, or any weakly constructed structure when a bow echo passes over, a severe thunderstorm warning is not background noise. It is the warning to take cover, not to step outside and watch the light show. If you are in the Plains, Upper Midwest, or Great Lakes corridor, download your local National Weather Service app now and enable severe weather alerts tonight while the pattern is still a few days out. Not when a storm is 30 minutes away. Tonight. The 2020 derecho issued its most serious watch upgrades in the final hours, but the warnings that helped people most were the ones issued the night before that put the region on awareness. You want the awareness warning, not the last-minute confirmation. If you are a farmer or have livestock in the high plains or Midwest, this week's hail and wind window is not trivial. Document your crop and equipment condition now, before the storms, for insurance purposes. Ensure livestock have access to shelter. Secure any portable structures, equipment, or materials that could become projectiles in 80 or 90 mile per hour straight line winds. And if you are anywhere in the path of both the derecho risk corridor and the subsequent heat dome, and that covers a big part of the central and eastern United States, consider a simple question. If you lost power on Friday and it was not restored for 3 to 5 days, and temperatures were running 95 to 100 degrees by Monday, what is your plan? Backup power for a window unit, a known cooling center nearby, a friend or family member outside the impact zone. You do not need a bunker. You need a plan that can actually be executed, because the utilities and emergency management agencies that would normally respond to a major power outage will be overwhelmed if the derecho corridor and the heat dome overlap the way the current pattern suggests they could. The tropics will get their turn. Bertha will form when it forms, and when it does, I will be here tracking it. But the next storm that is going to be a huge problem is not forming in the Gulf of Mexico right now. It is loading in the atmosphere over the drought-baked plains, and it has a 7-day runway before it has to show itself on the radar. If this video helped you look in the right direction today, subscribe and hit the bell, because when this pattern starts verifying, updates are going to matter in real time. And hit like so this gets in front of the people in the corridor who are still watching the tropics. I will see you in the next one.